Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to our webcast with our founder and president, Helga Zepp LaRouche. It's July 13th, 2019. And I think we'll begin with some developments that are follow-ups to the Osaka G20 summit and the Trump trip to the demilitarized zone. There were some developments around North Korea in the last couple of days that continue the Singapore spirit, Helga. What's going on with that?
Well, that is actually one of the brightest spots in the strategic situation because very clearly as a follow-up of the summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the United States now agreed to some what can only be described as a step-by-step diplomatic approach by agreeing to ease the sanctions or some of the sanctions for the next 12 to 18 months. Now, this is very important because, if you don't give anything to North Korea, you cannot expect them to go all the way in the denuclearization. And this is what this demand to do it all at once had actually led to the sabotage of Hanoi. But now the United States agrees to ease the sanctions. And I think that North Korea has changed its constitution to basically not put so much emphasis on the military, but to say that science and technology is the most important resource of the country and that will be a priority. I think this is a very good sign. So I think, there are these positive follow-ups from all of these summitry, but unfortunately, we are not yet over the hill.
I assume you would include in these positive follow-ups the discussions that are coming up with the Russians and the United States on arms talks.
That is very important. They are taking place and will take place in Geneva between Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov and Andrea Thompson and one other Undersecretary of State from the US side. And they will also discuss the New START agreement. And as Ryabkov said, they will try to set up a structured dialogue to deal with all of these questions. And that was exactly what had been missing the whole time, which is why people had said that the situation was more dangerous than during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there are clearly positive steps, but, as I said, unfortunately, that does not mean that the world is already in safe quarters or waters, as one may say, but the provocations are completely continuing, and they clearly show the British hand. We had the seizure of the Iranian tanker a couple of days ago, or several days ago, in front of Gibraltar. Then both the US and the British Defense Departments claim that Iranian speedboats were trying to guide or force a British tanker out of the international area in the Strait of Hormuz into Iranian waters, which was then intersected by a Royal Navy frigate, which was denied by Iran. So it's very hard to say which story is true, but it just shows you, that the situation is very far from out of danger.
Well, and speaking of the British hand in this, we have the continued fallout of the Darroch affair, the British ambassador to the United States who resigned this week. But one of the most important memos, I think, that he sent back was the one where he said that Trump seems to oppose a march toward war with Iran, but another provocation could lead to a U-turn. So I think this shows definitely the British intention, which you mentioned in terms of Iran.
Yeah, and naturally, the fallout of this Sir Kim Derek affair is not yet fully developed because, it definitely has soured the special relationship, and the fact that Jeremy Hunt is giving full backing to Kim Derek also forebodes badly in case he would be prime minister. However, if Boris Johnson would be the next prime minister, then this whole question of the special relationship would look in a completely different light again. So, I don't think that it's a question of just personalities, because the British Empire is, as we have said many times, not Great Britain. It's not even the British government, even if their hand was clearly in the Russiagate affair. But it is, what we mean by British Empire is this entire system of the neoliberal financial system, naturally with the headquarter in London and little dependance in Wall Street. But it is this system of unipolar running the world as an empire modeled on the British Empire, based on the Anglo-American special relationship. So that is something which needs to be looked at more thoroughly. And obviously there the question of a new credit system is the absolute key.
I think one of the quotes from Hunt was that he praised Dirac for acting in the best tradition of British foreign policy and diplomacy, which is precisely the case. The undermining of the United States is part of that British tradition. Now, in terms of provocations, Helga, there's now something brewing around the whole question of the arms sales to Taiwan. Why is this significant? Why is the United States engaging in this now?
Well, this is a very dangerous thing. And, for 2.2 billion weapon sales to Taiwan, which China regards as a violation of the One China policy. Why would you arm Taiwan when officially the United States says that they agree with the One China policy? Now, this is a real provocation. And Wang Yi, I think from Eastern Europe, where he was on a tour, basically said that the United States is playing with fire in doing that. So, I think all of these, discontinuities or anomalies reflect the fact that Trump still, despite his intentions to improve the relationship with Russia and China, does not have his administration under control.
And we see also that Trump is now launching a tour where he's talking about the economy, talking about some things that are important, the importance of manufacturing and so on. And yet the reality of the US situation is what we just pointed out in the EIR on the bitter truth about the US economy. We had this statement from the Los Angeles Police Department chief about homelessness in LA. I think that says something a lot about what's happening in the United States, don't you?
Well, I mean, he said that in 2017, 800 homeless died. In 2018, 900. Now that means, almost 3 people per day. I mean, this is an unbelievable humanitarian crisis, is what this police department chief, Michael Moore, said. And it just shows you that we are absolutely on the mark with the new EIR study, the bitter truth about the economic recovery and the absolute urgent need to completely shift gear and go in the direction of the 4 laws of my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche.
Well, now we're coming into a moment that's quite significant historically, that the Schiller Institute is going to be making sure that people understand the significance. That is the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. We're doing a lot around that, Helga. Why don't you identify for people the significance of this opportunity now to raise this question of space?
Well, I mean, obviously, the most important aspect of space research and space travel is the fact that it is an undeniable proof of the fact that the Earth is not a closed system, but that we are living in a large universe, which is indeed so large that even the best imagination has a hard time to imagining it. For example, the Hubble telescope has proven that we know at least now of 2 trillion galaxies. 2 trillion galaxies. There are more stars in the universe than sandcorns on Earth. And obviously, this puts a lie to the whole question that the resources are limited, which the environmentalist movement has been trying to preach for many decades, because the Chinese mission to the far side of the moon, where they plan to mine helium-3 as a fuel for future thermonuclear reaction on Earth, proves that any of these stars and heavenly bodies in the future can be regarded as resources. Now, I find it very exciting that on the 20th of July, when you have the 50th year anniversary of the Apollo moon landing, there is a lot going on, which proves that the hiatus, at least in the West and for NASA, that is over. You had the announcement by President Trump that he wants to put another man and a first woman on the moon by 2024, and there are big preparations underway in this direction. But on the occasion of this anniversary, the Chinese have reactivated their Chang'e 4 lunar lander and rover on the far side of the moon, and they are being active again. Then India has announced that they are actually in 2 days from now, they are scheduled on the 15th of July to start their mission to the moon, which is supposed to land in September near the south pole of the moon to investigate the ice in deep craters, which are always in shadow. Now, this is very exciting because, ice is water, and that is a perspective of life on the moon. Now, also India, which regards itself as a major space nation, they actually are doing that. And also Yang Xiwan, who is the father of the Chinese space program, he announced that China will next year start its Mars mission to basically investigate if there can be terraforming on the planet, on Mars, to find out, if there are conditions, if one can create conditions for mankind to stay there for a longer period of time. So then also, this is very good because this is an element where the German science is still active and not green, is that the largest German-Russian joint space mission was started, where they are sending space vehicles and satellites to galaxies which will study galaxies which are hundreds of light years, of billions of light years away, with a higher resolution than ever before, to gain insights into the origin and the history of the universe. Now, all of these things are absolutely exciting because they prove, the creativity of man can always overcome barriers, and open up new horizons. And this is a complete refutation of the complete unscientific and actually, superstitious view of the ecologists.
It also challenges those people who say that the space program is a waste of money. It's really superfluous to the economic situation. But your husband always emphasized the importance of new technologies, and especially space technologies. How does this work to refute the neoliberal view of economics?
Well, I think, it is not money and not even resources which constitute wealth, but it is entirely only the creative powers of reason and the ability of man to again and again generate scientific and technological breakthrough, which completely redefines what a resource is. And that, was the big fraud which, we fought against since its beginning. First of all, the Club of Rome thesis, which appeared in 1972 about the limits of growth, which was a complete fraud because it was just a computer model where the end result was fixed first, namely to say that the resources are limited and that therefore we have to conserve everything, we have to go to zero growth. And, what they left out of this computer model was naturally the fact that new scientific discoveries redefine what a resource is. So in a certain sense, this is just the last trick of the oligarchy, where their financial system is collapsing, and they are now trying to invite a major investment in so-called sustainable technologies, where Goldman Sachs just put out a story saying they put out an index or indices where people can see where they can invest in such sustainable technologies and play a positive moral role in this whole present climate debate. Now, this is people, have a short memory, but these catastrophic announcements, Prince Charles came now out and even, changed the view of the IPCC that, the world has only 12 years, which has triggered this whole Friday for Future hysteria among the teenagers. Prince Charles now, in a meeting with the Commonwealth's foreign ministers, basically said we only have 18 months to change the condition which challenge the existence of mankind on this planet. And he expects the ministers of the Commonwealths to carry out the necessary policies. Now, this is completely crazy. I mean, people have forgotten that in the 80s, you had the dying wood. I remember a Spiegel magazine headline from the beginning of the 80s, which said, the ecological Hiroshima is about to happen, referring to the sour rain, which would destroy the woods. Now, as everybody can see in Germany, the woods are in excellent condition. And later they buried this story by saying, oh, it was not sufficiently researched. And, this imprecise analysis caused a lot of depressive moods. So we are sorry for that. Then in the 90s, you had the story with the ozone hole. Nobody talks about the ozone hole anymore. And now you have the world ending in 18 months. So I think this is completely unscientific. And, it makes very clear that this whole ecology movement is really not based on any scientific facts. They're basing their views on algorithms, on computer models, and these computer models are rigged to the benefit of the financial oligarchy and the neoliberal system. So I think it's really high time that we go back to science and technology and the true laws of the universe, and then we will have a bright future, but only then.
I find it quite humorous that Goldman Sachs is talking about moral standards when it comes to economics. But I think the other point, Helga, that I'd like you to just expand on a little bit is that you and your husband became friends and collaborators with the space visionary Krafft Ehricke. And he presented something that even goes far beyond the simple economic benefits. What is the importance of the idea of the extraterrestrial imperative that he put forward?
Well, it has everything to do with the identity of man and the image of man. I mean, what the space travel and space research, the idea to build industrial complexes and villages on the moon, the idea to use that industrial base for interstellar space flight of future generations. I mean, all of this means, which Krafft Ehricke very beautifully articulated in the 3 laws of astronautics. I don't have the exact formulations now, but the first law is something like that there is no limit to man except man himself, and that it's the natural identity of man to spread in the universe as far as possible. And with that goes an incredible optimism that man indeed can find out the laws of the universe, and that these laws of the universe are in absolute correspondence to the laws of his own creative thinking. Now, that is very, very beautiful. And, we are now at a point, President Putin in a recent speech spoke about the need to, develop thermonuclear fusion in a crash program. Now, he also mentioned that, the beauty about fusion power is that it's one of the technologies which is very clearly imitating processes in nature. With other words, if we can have fusion power as an energy resource on the Earth, we are doing exactly what the sun is doing in the production of light and heat on the sun. And the future of technology will be more and more that we study what is the function of life, what is the function of creative reason, and that we will bring our activity on the planet more and more in cohesion with the physical laws of our universe. And that will have a tremendous impact on how we organize our affairs politically on the planet. So, I think the vision Krafft Ehricke had, who, by the way, was on the board of the Schiller Institute and who appreciated the work of the Schiller Institute tremendously, because, as he once told me, it is never the technology which is good or bad, but it is always the human being. Is the human being morally capable of using these technologies for the good of the human species or not? And that is why he agreed that Schiller's particular idea of the aesthetical education for the moral improvement of mankind was absolutely necessary to go along with scientific and technological progress, because science and technology alone don't answer the question of the moral behavior of man, but it is the aesthetical education, it's the influence of great art, classical music, classical poetry, and other classical arts, which have this effect of ennobling the human being, and therefore the two things have to go absolutely together.
I think in that context, it's very interesting to see what's happening in a country like Bolivia, where you have a legacy of colonial policy, which deprives countries of that connection to classical culture and science. And now here you have a relatively poor country in South America moving ahead. This is an example of the kind of optimism you're talking about, isn't it?
Well, remember that Bolivia used to be the second poorest country in Latin America, just after Haiti. In the recent years, because of collaboration, especially with Russia and China, they have done already a lot for poverty alleviation. And now President Evo Morales is in Moscow meeting with Putin. They made many agreements for nuclear energy, for agriculture, for infrastructure, trade deals, but especially, they are very optimistic that Bolivia will become a nuclear country. The Bolivian government at this occasion put out a 1-minute video where they proudly announce that they will become such a country focusing on science and technology. So if you look at that, it's not just Bolivia, it's, as we mentioned, North Korea, which wants to put major emphasis or primary emphasis on science and technology, but also, Rosatom, the Russian nuclear firm, is cooperating. They pride themselves to be one of the absolute most advanced nuclear facilities and capable of nuclear technology in the world. They are helping many other developing countries and co-invest, for example, in Egypt, in many other developing countries. So I think that we will see in the very near future that many countries of the new paradigm, the countries which work with the Belt and Road Initiative, are all going in the direction of higher energy flux density, especially nuclear, then the emphasis on fusion power, crash programs, even a higher energy flux density, a key notion developed by my husband, Lyndon LaRouche. I think this is all very promising. And this has an incredible implication. Now, Politico today has an article where they say, which is the cleanest energy? Amazingly, it is nuclear energy. That's not a surprise, but it's important that they start to discuss this. I mean, the problem very clearly is that if you look at the landscape and the world map, Asia is rising. It's not just China. It's South Korea, now soon North Korea, Japan, India, many other Asian countries who are all absolutely committed to put their future on innovation, on science and technology, on reason. And if you then look how certain quarters in the West, not everybody, the Italian government clearly is making this exception. There was the first meeting between the Italian finance minister Tria and his Chinese counterpart, and they set up long-term financial structures to finance the Belt and Road projects. They put out 250 million worth of so-called panda bonds, which are supposed to finance Italian investments of small and medium industries in China. So Italy is clearly going ahead. But if you look at some of the other Western countries, especially Germany, which is breaking my heart because it's the country which has produced so many thinkers and inventors and poets and composers, and now they are on this absolute green suicide pact. Naturally, the green phenomena is also in many other European countries. In the Green New Deal of the Democrats is also the same insanity. The problem is with these policies, the West is destroying itself while Asia is rising. And I think this is a very, very dangerous phenomena which can only lead to new conflicts. And this is really, behind this present confrontation by NATO and by the British against Russia and China, because they don't want to accept that, these countries have turned to the principles of science and technology, and the Western elite, the neoliberal elite, is absolutely stuck to the idea that they make profit for a few at the expense of hundreds of millions of people. Because when you go with the green paradigm, what you are saying is we stick with the speculation in CO2 emissions, in hedge funds investing in solar and windmills. But that means only the speculators get rich, while you actually say, if you say it explicitly or not, that hundreds of millions of people will not have food, they will not have clean water, they will not have enough money for education, for housing. And this is really the core of the present migrant problem in Latin America and in Africa and in Southwest Asia. So I think we have to get a paradigm shift. We have to come back to the idea that, the human species is the only species which is capable of making scientific breakthroughs, of getting a better understanding of the physical laws of the universe, and that is what increases the productivity in the production process, what increases the productivity of the labor force. And this is the source of our long-term survivability. I mean, all these were ideas which were beautifully developed by Lyndon LaRouche. And, this is why I keep saying that if we want to save the West, we have to have the exoneration of my husband. So this is because, as Ramsey Clark, when the what people wrongly call the deep state, which in reality is the Anglo-American apparatus, secret service apparatus linked to this neoliberal establishment, when they put my husband innocently into jail, it was not just a person. It was supposed to put an entire body of ideas into jail. And, if the West wants to survive, then that injustice has to be remedied. And the name of my husband has to be absolutely cleared so that people have a fresh mind and study his ideas, because that is the absolutely crucial antidote to the stupid, silly stuff coming out of the mouths of such people like Prince Charles.
And I encourage our viewers to go and look at some of the books that Mr. LaRouche wrote. For example, There Are No Limits to Growth, which absolutely refuted the whole green ideology. We will be having some events over the next week in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the lunar landing. And I'd urge people also to keep an eye on our website for that. So Helga, is there anything else? I think we've covered a lot.
No, I think it's a good moment to reflect on the, significance of space, and think about that the idea of space travel has everything to do with the image of man. Now, it is an optimism which is caused by that, and the oligarchy doesn't like people to be optimistic, because if man is conscious about his or her creative powers, then you are free. And I was really both shocked and disgusted about some of the programs coming from, for example, the second channel German TV, or even some programs in the German Deutschlandfunk, which is sort of the official radio. They basically completely try to suppress the beauty of space travel by saying this was all done by the German Nazis. I would really say that anybody who says this has no idea who Krafft Ehricke was and all the other scientists who were devoted to science and not to an ideology which they were, basically enjailed by, or rather, circumstances they couldn't oppose. So to smear it that way, or this ridiculous program in the German radio, by basically saying, oh, in the beginning, people thought that astronauts are heroes, but now, this has all gone, and one can see that astronauts are just victims. And this is so ridiculous. And you should, whenever you hear something like that, you should be absolutely aware that this is the handwriting of an oligarchy, which does not want you to be conscious of your own creative powers. And with that, I want you to think about it, because you will see a lot of beautiful pictures in the next days. We ourselves will have events on the 20th of July. We will have big rallies promoting this idea. So join the Schiller Institute and help us to get the world into a new paradigm, which is already emerging in many parts of the world.
Okay, with that, Helga, till next week, keep spreading optimism.
Yes.